If you're a leader, you need to hear this. Great leadership isn't about having followers. It's about making more leaders. The real measure of leadership isn't about power or position. It's about impact and influence. The best leaders uplift, mentor, and empower others to reach their full potential. Leadership isn't about control. It's about creating a culture where people feel valued, inspired, and ready to grow. Remember this. If you treat your employees like they make a difference, they will. Join us in transforming leadership into a movement. Watch this video and see the incredible difference it makes when leadership is about building leaders, not followers. What's the best leadership advice you've ever received? Drop it in the comments.
Welcome to Building Resilience. I'm Jose Pereira, your host. This is the place where true leaders are forged, where stories of adversity turn into lessons of strength, and where faith, courage, and resilience come alive. Each week we bring you voices that inspire, challenge, and equip you to lead with an unbreakable spirit. This is more than a podcast. It's a movement, and it begins right now.
Welcome, everybody, to Building Resilience, my podcast. This is a podcast where we showcase people that have thrived, have gone through things in their life, but that basically have to thrive. So today I have a very wonderful guest here that is Dr. André P. Walton, correct? PhD. So he's the founder of the Plan for Change. We're going to talk about what is Plan for Change. 4 with the number 4, Plan for Change, who blends years of entrepreneurial innovation with a PhD in social psychology, focused on organizational creativity. Oh, wow. Let's talk about this. His work helps leaders strengthen their decision-making, build innovative cultures, and others through practical frameworks like Spheric thinking. Let's talk about what is the Spheric thinking. So, Dr. André, thank you for being here in the podcast.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Jose.
Okay, let's begin to talk a little bit because I have been doing a little research about you. So you started as an entrepreneur, and it became after that a coach because you have a PhD in psychology. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I spent, first of all, my passion, my focus of my life is creativity. And both my parents were very, very creative. My mother was 25 years old when I was born, and my dad was 60. Oh, wow. And gives you some idea of how creative people can sometimes have not very much regard for social norms. In my 20s, I started to invent things, and Great Britain was going through one of its many traditional periods of recession, and nobody was very interested in licensing or taking on my invention. So I cleaned off the kitchen table and started my first business. And then 15 years later, I had offices in Europe and America. We'd acquired two other companies, and things were going very, very well until a couple of things happened that plunged me into burnout. And so burnout was I had heard the word before, but I'd never realized that it would plunge you into such a pit of devastation. So that memory always kind of stuck with me. When I sold my companies, as you suggested, I went back to school and got a PhD in social psychology, and my research was in creativity. So creativity has been one strand of my DNA for forever. And over the past 20 years, it's been particularly fascinating because when I published my first book in 2011, I came up with a number of unique theories that were derived from my PhD research. And they were theories that were based on what I'd seen, some research that was done previously. And then over the next 10 years, we had fMRI, functional MRI. And then, so for the first time, you could actually see what was happening in somebody's brain when they thought or did certain things. And that was incredibly exciting because it validated a lot of the theories that I had written about in my book. And basically, the crucial thing was that when you think or do something creative, you get a unique set of neural pathways lighting up. And those pathways are very different from when we think deductively and analytically. And that was the core of my next 15 years of work.
You mentioned several things that are very interesting because you talk about creativity, and I always talk about that a good leader has to have the ability to be adaptability. And I believe that both the creativity and the adaptability are very, very, really well connected because when you're adaptive, you are creating, you're changing things. I got curious because you started businesses. I researched that you lived in multiple countries, and then you begin talking about creativity, but you finally created this Plan for Change program. Tell me how you came to that and what is this program about?
Well, Plan for Change was essentially just the name of my company, but the crucial thing was my goal is to reposition creativity in people's minds, because doing that brings about very exciting and positive changes. The kinds of things I'm talking about, if you ask a dozen people what they understand by creativity, you come back with a dozen different answers. And quite often they're quite trivial. People talk about, oh, well, when my aunt stopped teaching at school, she bought some paints and a canvas and started painting. That was her introduction to creativity. Or people will start to talk about the internet and the iPhone and, these other things. Well, they're all they're all related to creativity. Mm-hmm. But at the core, creativity is a way of thinking. Mm-hmm. And it's a core way of thinking. It's an innate human drive to think that way. That's why, we don't have the iPhone and the internet because we've got opposable thumbs. We have them because we have the human drive that we now call creativity. And you could see that from the bow and arrow and the wheel right the way up. This was a core drive. And like any innate core drive, if we don't satisfy that need, there can be negative consequences. So, in the world we live in today, we're very technologically based. Mm-hmm. And that goes along with a way of thinking which is very analytical and deductive. And we don't have the balance which is creative thinking, because deductive analytical thinking is what I call very convergent. We're drilling down, we're focusing in. If somebody talks to you about something analytical, do you have enough insurance for your house and your home? This means that we have to drill in, we have to focus all the time on whatever it is we're being asked of us. Now, creativity is inherently divergent. And indeed, in social science, creativity is very difficult to measure. So we often use divergent thinking as a proxy for creativity. And divergent thinking is what we all had as kids. Mm-hmm. When we were 2, 3, 4 years old, and we had no history in our mind. We were building our understanding of the world from a blank sheet. Mm-hmm. And so we're continually looking at the big picture. We pick up some object and say, oh, what's this? And it's like putting a new piece into a jigsaw puzzle. We've got no clues as to where to put it. So, sometimes that can be hilarious. The kid will pick up a vegetable strainer and think, what's this? Well, suddenly it becomes a hat of an ancient warlord So it's fun to watch, but it's also creative thinking. It's the ultimate creative thinking. And the nice thing about having a way of thinking that is divergent is that it's a balance for when we're thinking convergently. So in a practical sense, if you're coaching somebody that has anxiety, stress, or burnout, they're quite often stuck in what I call the hamster wheel effect. They're there in the little wheel going round and round and round, and they're like a racehorse with blinders on. They can see one direction, and that's all to do with their burnout and their stress. And that's the result of this convergent thinking. Well, if you introduce them to processes that can start to build that divergent creative thinking process, that counteracts that. That's almost like telling the brain, take a step back, have a look at the whole picture. And suddenly they realize that there is a future for them. There are positive things going on the way. Their current path can actually have a positive outcome. And that's what you need to do to break that cycle. But also, there's a couple of other interesting things on the way there. When you look at the neural pathways related to creative thinking, they're the same ones that relate to when somebody's thinking about emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
And it's also well established in social science that if people are doing things that are creative, they are generally happier. So it's a triple whammy. You take somebody that is stuck in this, sometimes, burnout can be serious enough to end up in suicide. And you take somebody that's stuck in this process of looking, it's not they can't find the light at the end of the tunnel, they can't even find the tunnel. And so, and you open up that field of vision, you balance that out. And the important thing is that by doing that, you're actually creating new neural pathways. You're not adjusting the old neural pathways. That's not a successful way of doing it. If you have an addict, someone that's trying to get over alcohol or drugs or gambling, the first thing you do is you take them out of their current environment. You take them to a new space where they don't have any triggers that will take them back into their negative cycle. And it's the same with building new neural pathways. If you have somebody that's very, very depressed or anxiety ridden or with burnout, and you create new neural pathways, that is a new path, and you can get their mind to go into that pathway instead of down this very negative route towards the tunnel. So it's a lengthy answer to your question, but it's a very interesting kind of process.
But it's interesting because you talk about burnout because you suffer it. So tell me how you came to the burnout, because now you talk about something that you suffered.
Yes, absolutely. Well, burnout wasn't as well researched back then. This was in the 1990s, and now people are very much more aware of it. Indeed, half the professional adults in the US report having had burnout in their current jobs. Yeah. And half of them are very likely to get burnout again in the next 18 months. So it's a really serious epidemic. For me, I was very lucky, actually, because one of the things that happens with burnout very regularly is that people push away all those friends and family who could actually be helpful to them. And I was systematically doing that. But I had one friend that he just wouldn't take no for an answer. So I'd say, I just can't do it this week. I'm just too busy this week. Can we meet up next week? And the following day, he's knocking on my door, with some donuts, saying, I just brought us breakfast, Andre. Okay. So he's not going to take no for an answer. And he carried on, making sure he just wouldn't accept that we were going to postpone this to some other time. He could see what was going on.
You were pushing him, huh?
Absolutely. And he gave me a piece of paper one day and he said, look, call this number. And this number was for a lady called Dana Birdsell, who was a meditation teacher. And I went to her 3 days in a row to be to learn meditation. And it was a real lifesaver for me because even after the first day, that was the first good night's sleep I'd had in, I don't know, 9 months, a year. It was quite phenomenal. And to this day, I'm now a 40-year meditator.
And tell me, what was the cause of your burnout? What were you doing at that time that drive to the burnout? What was that?
Well, for me, firstly, it was a very, very busy life. I mean, I was doing 250,000 air miles a year. I was right at the beginning of a cycle of, I think, 6 trade shows, starting with Chicago, going to London, the Music Messe in Frankfurt, going to Tokyo, where there was a medical show and a music show, back to Los Angeles, and then to Atlanta.
Wow.
That was the cycle every summer. And I had just set up the booth in Chicago, and there was my phone rang, and it was my mother in England. My stepfather had died, and she was in tears. She didn't know what to do. Blah 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 blah. So I put the phone down and tried to start planning in my mind what I was going to do. And my manager was supposed to be coming up that same day to help man the booth. And I got a call from my secretary in Florida who said she hadn't seen my manager for 2 days.
Wow.
And I had forgotten, but he actually was previously an alcoholic. And he'd gone shopping at the weekend, and all these bottles of wine had mysteriously fallen into his shopping cart, and he was, seriously impaired. And so, that which really created a lot of problems. So I solved all those bits and pieces. I got it all sorted out, and managed to get some of my staff in England to take his place in terms of doing these trade shows with me. But it was those 2 things were enough pressure, I think sometimes of entrepreneurship as being a bit of a razor blade. On this side, you've got excitement, you've got all the energy of building a business, and the other side of the razor blade is just where it all seems like a fruitless effort. It's exhausting, it's burnout. And so that was it. For some people, it's a gradual process. For me, those 2 events and sorting out those 2 events over the next few weeks that was just enough stress to make me think it was no longer exciting. The balloon of excitement had burst. And so that was really when I had been thinking about putting my businesses on the market. I already had a buyer for the medical business and the music one. I had some ideas in my mind, but this really was a lot of pressure to follow through with that. It just suddenly all seemed as if it wasn't really worthwhile.
So when you decided to sell the business was because you decided to move on after the burnout and start a new life? Was something like that?
Yes.
Okay.
It was exactly that. Yeah.
Okay, so let me tell you something because now you are teaching how to go out the burnout. So to the audience, simple things that you can show to them if they're hearing these and they're going, because maybe people are hearing these today, it would say, oh, this is me, I'm going through that. So what is your recommendation to these people?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, firstly, when I'm coaching people with burnout, there are 3 segments of my coaching program. I focus, and these are designed around each client separately, and I call them the 3 R's: relationships, recreation, and responsibilities.
Okay.
Because for the burnout client, but the sufferer from burnout, responsibilities. Well, firstly, recreation disappears. They'll tell you about all the things they used to do. Yes, I used to love to play tennis. I used to do this. I used to do that. No, they've all gone. Relationships are hanging on by a thread, typically at work and at home. Sometimes people report being on the edge of divorce as a function of that state of mind. And then responsibilities, a lot of times people, especially people who have what people like to call control issues, they will tend not to delegate sufficiently in their businesses. And that gets worse as they get to burnout, because they blame the burnout on the stress of not achieving things, so they do more, and they trust other people to do them even less. So those are the
And
three
sometimes
things.
they micromanage too,
What's that?
Sometimes the people tend to micromanage.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And that becomes more. That's all part of the convergent view of the world. That's folding in. I don't need these people outside my immediate view. And so that's something to be aware of. So that'll give you an idea of the symptoms. If you find yourself sort of not turning up for the meetings that you used to have with your friends on a weekly basis, you suddenly realize it's a couple of months since you've seen them, and maybe you're not spending as much time with the family, or it's a long time since you had a date night with your wife, and these kinds of things. So the kinds of things that you can do to help the situation is to start the process of thinking creatively. And this doesn't necessarily mean doing things that are overtly creative. I mean, if you love to garden, then spend a little bit more time gardening. If you used to paint, if you used to play an instrument, just put a little effort into going back to those things. But the key here is to shake things up a bit. So let's assume that you're not in a situation of burnout, but you want to make sure that you want to be resilient to it. So the thing is to really get it used to the idea of change being positive. So, perhaps you take a different route to work. If you go to your local restaurant, choose something different from the menu, or even go to a different restaurant. Get with a family and do different things for recreation. In other words, change it all up. The knee-jerk reaction as to where you're going to go on vacation, which is you've enjoyed doing the same place for the last 5 years, change it, do something different. So all these processes of getting out of that thinking rut are all part of the creative process. They're all because they're basically making you step back and thinking, you know what, we do have more options than this. We do have different options for our recreation. We do have different options for, what we're going to do for our annual vacation, or and you see this with, if you're coaching people that are thinking they would want a career change, they're quite often still focused on something that's broadly similar to what they have been doing. And the fact of the matter is, perhaps we need to step back. Perhaps the fact that you haven't enjoyed being an accountant for the past 30 years might be a clue that you could do something different. So it's this the key to all this is look at all the options. That's the root of creativity.
You mentioned several things that for me really resonate a lot, because I have a coaching program where one of the main things that I try to emphasize to leaders is that you need to really regain a balance between your business success and your personal fulfillment, because this is one of the biggest mistakes that people do, that they're climbing maybe the corporate ladder, or they're climbing their business, they're growing their business, and they abandon those simple things like you said, family vacation, or taking time with the people that love you, and the connection with the people that love you. That's so important, because you mentioned that the people tend to isolate themselves, and that this is the society we're living today. So
Yes.
it's really like a battle trying to
Yeah.
tell the people how important is regaining that balance. This is something that I typically talk about it because I went through that situation. I was a victim of that,
Right.
of always working. You become a workaholic, you abandon your family, you never have time to your wife, your kids, and at some point, everything explodes. So tell me something. What is the most challenging thing you find with your clients when they come to you? Is because they're like, I need help. They come in that way.
Yes, sometimes they come to me because a traumatic event has occurred, like that suddenly their wife has left them a note or their husband has left them a note, and they've said, "Look, I need to go and spend this with my mother and father until you can make a bit more time for us," or something like that. Some quite serious message has been sent to them in some way.
Sorry, let me say something that I was thinking when you were talking. I have a close friend, I'm not going to mention here, but I remember one day he came to me because he was coming to his house, and when he opened the door of the house was empty. So his wife not only abandoned him, he took a truck and loaded everything. So that
Oh,
was empty. And the guy came to me, Jose, she doesn't leave me. She took everything. He was in shock. So go ahead.
oh wow. Yes, absolutely. Well, there are two hurdles to overcome as a coach in that situation. And the first is to make people realize that they need to dig a little bit deeper into what's going on with them, right? So this has got something to do with the person who's apparently abandoned you or whatever else it is, but this is also to do with you.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. We have to take responsibility for these things. And in terms of the overall picture, one of the important things that I stress to people is my definition of stress is a little different to some people's. I define stress as when you do not have the resources to meet a challenge. So even though the medical profession defines burnout as a part of work-related stress, that's a dangerous definition because this isn't necessarily just about work.
Okay.
And also by saying that we don't have the resources to meet the challenge, we are accepting some of the responsibility ourselves. This isn't just what the environment has done to us.
Okay.
So, when somebody's left their spouse, it's not just about the fact that they've walked off with a truckload of possessions. It's also something that we have to have responsibility for. So that's one thing. The second thing is people fondly imagine quite regularly that there's some kind of a rather superficial silver bullet that can solve the problem. Just sort this out for me. I need to get back to work, that kind of thing. So making people realize that there's something at the core level that has gone wrong, and we have to address it at the core level. So, and then the third thing which people can be skeptical about is the idea that it's a mental imbalance, that we need to have this additional resource. But when they try it, when they follow through, and I typically will say to people, look, I need you to spend, 15, 20 minutes of the day going for a walk. Go for a walk. If you've got somewhere really nice to walk in, a piece of woodland, a little piece of park, whatever it is, I want you to do that every day for 20 minutes. You've got time to do that, right? Yeah, sure. Okay. And they realize that along with a few other things that I give them 3 or 4, I want them to write down some of the things that are going on in their day. It's one of the things. And there are various other little things that we work on. But when they realize after a week that they're feeling better and that really all they've done is fairly trivial stuff, superficially, like going for a walk, and they don't realize what's happening when you go for a walk. Science tells us that when you go for a walk, what's actually happening is the piece that glues the two halves of the brain together, it's called the corpus callosum, actually works better. It passes more data. That's where the spherical thinking process comes in. So we're actually using more of our brain. So we're not, that's one of the things that gets you out of this very convergent process that people go through. So, these things can seem a bit sort of like, you know, if you've broken your leg and you go to the doctor and he says, well, I tell you what, when you go back home, have a warm bath. Well, a warm bath isn't going to do anything to my broken leg. It's that sort of feeling they get when you say, you're prescribing them a 20-minute walk every day.
What is the rate of success in your clients when they apply these techniques?
Well, I haven't had anybody that hasn't had very positive results. And in fact, in my for my Branish Burnout program, I did a beta study with 6 clients, and one of them he said, Andre, I've been going to therapy for 18 months to sort this out. I've got more in 6 weeks with this program than I did during that whole time. And it's very logical. It's very straightforward. And as long as you connect with the client so they actually follow through with what you ask them to do, and it's nothing very difficult or time consuming. It just requires them to have a little bit of a change of mindset. Right. That they really want to make, they're really prepared to make this change. Because all the time, if their ultimate goal is to go back and do exactly what they were doing before, then it's really a waste of time for everybody. Yeah. But I've not come across that. I've come with people that I have talked to, very quickly realize that yes, there is something wrong.
Something for me that is very important, that I have a friend that she's a brain coach. She has a PhD in brain, and she is really heavy talking about rewiring your brain, retraining your brain, using techniques to do that, because there was a common thinking that that you do something in a way and it's difficult to change. But yes. The truth of the matter, and you said it very well, that is in you. You have to take the decision. It's in you to take the decision. But if you are conscious taking the decision that you need to change, you can do it. Because today it scientifically has been checked that you can do it, but you need to do it. So it's in you to do it. So what would be the most important thing to the people that are hearing this to say if they're going to a situation, a behavioral way of thinking that they think that they cannot change? What would be your recommendation to them?
Well, I think if somebody's prepared to do the things that you tell them, then change can be in very small increments. But it can still be a very different neural pathway. Okay. So, in other words, if you're going to take somebody that believes they are an alcoholic or they drink too much, and you're going to say, okay, we're going to find ways of keeping you out of the bar at night. To just stop there is no good. But if you give them something else to do instead, not going to an AA meeting or something, although that might be well appropriate for some people, but I'm talking about finding something else to do. Okay, when you were younger, you used to enjoy playing table tennis. Okay, well, I want you just to see if you can organize a game of table tennis every night, And so give them something else to do. And that's a different neural pathway. You're doing something totally different. You're having a bit of exercise rather than sitting down there with a glass in your hand. You're with different people who have also chosen not to be sitting at the bar every night. And you're doing something that, is also a little bit physical. So you've got this corpus callosum thing going on. So the new neural pathways part can be very small increments, but it's a mindset.
Correct.
It's giving you a way of saying, no, I don't do that anymore. I do this. So what do you do in the evening? Oh, I play table tennis. So it gives you giving you that name, that experience, and that goal is a new mindset. If you spirited yourself off to a totally different country, you could start with a blank slate as to what you do during the day. You're surrounded by different environments, different people, different food, several different religions around you, perhaps. You've got many different choices to change who you are. I mean, I've lived and worked in 7 different countries, and I've seen ways that I've had to change, or not had to, but changed in those different countries, doing different things, watching different things, eating different food, eating different food at different times. If you go to Spain and expect to get a nice meal at 7 o'clock in the evening, you're out of luck.
Yeah. That's so true.
Come back at 11 o'clock. The kitchen will be open.
Come at midnight.
But those are ways you can really create a different neural pathway is another way of saying a different mindset.
Correct.
They are related. Of course, a mindset is more than one neural pathway. It's a whole game change. But it's important for people to realize that when we talk about mindset, it's not just about saying, you know what, I think I'm going to be an entrepreneur. Yes, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. It's more than that. It's finding ways to anchor that thought in your life with real action.
Okay. Talk me about the spherical thinking. What is the spherical thinking?
Well, at one time, people used to think the left-hand side of the brain was logical and the right-hand side was creative.
Okay.
And through fMRI imaging, we realized that's not the case anymore.
Oh, wow.
And in fact, now there are different areas of the brain that do different things. We know that. But in terms of thinking about something creatively, you will be using all of your brain.
Okay.
Or parts of all of your brain, parts of both sides of the brain. I mean, you'll have specific neural pathways, but those neural pathways will not be limited to one half or the other.
Okay.
So, and that coupled with, as I mentioned, the corpus callosum. Now, the corpus callosum that I mentioned before, which joins the two halves of the brain, that is a pathetically bad data transfer. It's the only way that data gets from one side to the other. But in this world of broadband, the corpus callosum is like a piece of string with 2 tin cans.
Okay.
I mean, it's very poor. So one of the things I do is several exercises to improve that way of thinking, because I want people who come to me as clients to be able to choose subconsciously or consciously which way they want to look at something. Do I want to look at this? Think of this like a jazz musician. When you get on stage with your other musicians, you're playing according to this kind of piece of music, whether or not you read the dots on the stage. My jazz band, I wouldn't let anybody read music. We had to learn the music. We had to know it and feel it. But basically, you're playing in the same time. You're playing, harmoniously. And then there comes the magic time when it's for you to improvise. Okay. And that's when you go off and do your own thing. So you've got 2 different ways of thinking there. One of them is this kind of structured thinking. I've got to play the same notes as this guy in exactly the same time. I'm not going to, relax the time a little bit or anything like that. I'm playing structured. And then suddenly my improvisation, I mean, it's not all over the place. It's following a very different sort of process. So those are the 2 ways of thinking, in a sense. And so I want people to be able to use both those ways of thinking. And that means having what we call neuroplasticity. And so, and the part of that neuroplasticity comes from improving the data transfer across the corpus callosum. And that's what a lot of my exercises do. Physically, the walking process, or anything that requires you physical movement, but no mental, you don't think about walking when you walk, you just walk.
Yeah.
And there are various other things that will improve that as well. So, that's really where spherical thinking gives you the capacity to think using any parts of the brain. So we've got the capacity to think deductively and analytically. On the other hand, we can slip into this creative process.
So you
And
can
if
switch to one to the other easily when you get trained.
Absolutely. I mean, and often good leaders will be able to do this. Somebody comes to them and say, look, we've got a real problem because you've budgeted this much to do this research and development project, and we don't have that much in the budget to spend on it. What are we going to do? The good leader will be able to step back mentally and say, okay, well, maybe one of our partners, we can license some of their technology and that'll save us reinventing the wheel. Maybe we can do this, maybe we can do that. Perhaps there's a government grant that might cover some of that. So, being able to look at all the options and flip into that state of mind where you're not trapped in this idea that, oh, we haven't got enough money to do that, so what are we going to do? Is to step back and say, okay, let's have a look at all the options. This is really sort of self-brainstorming.
But this is really revolutionary because, I was in the thinking that there are people that are logical and there are people that are more like creativity guys. But now you say that you can be both. So that's great. That's really great because that gives you a more spectrum to a leader, how they can behave depending on the situation they're going through. This is really revolutionary.
And both of those types of people could think like that. Even the logical guy, when he was or she was 2 years old, they thought creatively. So when people sometimes, if I'm giving a talk, somebody will put up their hand and say, Andre, I don't think this has anything to do with me. I'm just not a creative person. And I have to show them that they were.
And let me tell you something else. Sometimes it has to do with your environment. There a cultural thing. For example, I come from a third world country that is Venezuela. I'm Venezuelan born. And the other day I was in a conference and there was this lady talking about that you need to think outside the box. And I was laughing because I raised my hand and said, hey, I'm going to say something here. I'm Venezuelan. In Venezuela, there's a lot of issues there. There's no box. You have to think. There's no box. You have to think. So that people, culturally, they really are very creative because they need to manage their life. There's no other way. There's no other way. Or you do it, or you don't do it. Period.
Yes.
But sometimes it has to do with that sometimes the environment forced to take you that creativity as part of your way of living. No box. You have to think.
I many years ago I was camping in with my wife in our trailer down in the Baja in Mexico, and there was a holiday weekend, and so there were at least sort of 1,000 locals descended on this beach, and they were having fire pits and barbecues and that kind of stuff, and I happened to notice one of my neighbors, he had taken the drum from an old clothes dryer. Right? And got the drum with little holes in it, blah blah blah. That was his barbecue, and it was perfect. I mean, it had the holes in there for the air to get into it, and that kind of stuff. And it stuck with me because, I believe that in the environment that we are in here in the US, that we have so many different things. I mean, if you want a little shovel that's the right shape to dig a little hole, somebody will have it. It'll be there, hanging on the rack of Home Depot or whatever.
Somebody's going to be inventing it, yes.
Exactly. I mean, we don't have to be, sitting there thinking, how am I going to do this with the limited stuff available? Because it's everywhere. So, we don't get many challenges here in the US to our creativity, do we? I mean, it's just, and that's exactly what you're saying, isn't it? Really? I mean, it's
something else. I live in Houston, and 1 year ago we had this big storm that came to town, and there was a power outrage in some areas of maybe 4 or 5 days. It was crazy. Everybody was going crazy, 5 days without electricity. And in this country, that is normal. I mean, so when I was hearing that, I tend to laugh because I said, okay, I know, because you are not used to suffer. And let me tell you something else. That I don't know if this is good or bad, but because the people sometimes are not prepared to confront any crisis,
No.
when things happen. So what is your thought about that?
No, I totally agree. I mean, that episode I told you about when I was in the Baja, that was we were there over the millennium.
Okay.
So everybody here in the States, I mean, you couldn't buy an electrical generator. They were all sold. Nobody could make them quickly enough.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if you got to February, the following February, you could buy an electrical generator for nothing because everybody, but there's this mad panic. And yet that was the only thing that people thought about was, if we run out of electricity, what am I going to do? Oh, I need a generator. There was no notion that there was any alternative. Now I have a trailer up in one of the lakes in California, Lake Almanor, and it's literally a fifth wheel trailer. So and we lose power up there. We have fires, sometimes take the power out, but if the electricity goes, my refrigerator just switches over to gas.
Okay.
So and we have a similar thing here at home, just a small one, just as an emergency. I mean, there are no, it really doesn't need to be a disaster. That's the point. But the key to it not being a disaster is to be able to think creatively. Well, what options do I have? Okay, well, maybe in the summer I don't keep quite so much food in the freezer because that we do have power outages, and all sorts of different things. But as you say, I think if you're brought up in an environment where you have a high degree of uncertainty in any environment, then you've got to have the capability of taking a big picture look and saying, what am I going to do if this happens or this happens or this happens? And if you don't have that, then those muscles, and really, mentally, you can think of those neural pathways as muscles. That's really what they are. And so
it has to do with the resilience too, because when you are adapting to any situation, you become more resilient too, because you can handle many situations in different ways. Oh, we're coming almost to the end. So you did a TED Talks I saw you did a TED Talks. So it was talking about this?
Yes, I mean, in 15 minutes, there's a bit of a limit to what one can do. But my main goal in the TED Talk was the repositioning of creativity in people's minds.
Okay.
But I also introduced this idea that we have two ways of thinking.
Okay.
And that, if you really restrict yourself to this focused way of thinking and forget about the creative way of thinking, that is going to leave you with some disadvantages and a weakness when it comes to dealing with stress and dealing with burnout. Okay. That was the key kind of story behind it. Okay,
and it has been well perceived because TED Talk normally takes some time to come to get an audience. So how it's been doing?
Do you know, I haven't really followed it.
Okay.
I spread the word to people around me, and but I haven't, to be honest, I haven't seen how many views it's got.
Because I did a TED Talk too, and to be honest, then when I did it, and they take a time to post it.
Yes.
They post it like 6 weeks after, something like that. And
well, this was 3 months, I think, in my case.
Yeah. So I remember that when I did mine, in the first days, I was monitoring all the day how he was performing, and it was not. I said, "Oh, what's going on?" One day I came in and I saw 100,000 views.
Wow!
What?
Wow!
Yeah.
Fabulous! Fabulous!
But it came. It took time. It took time.
Yes.
It
Yes.
began, so it's like it began to grow. I don't know. I don't know how it got it, but it began to grow. And every time I see it, it has been growing and growing. I don't know how far it's gonna go, but it
Excellent.
minute pitch about where the people can find you. So go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I have two websites. You mentioned Plan for Change. That's PLAN number 4 CHANGE.org. Planforchange.org. My email is dr.andre at planforchange.org. And I have a speaker's site also, which is hire, HIRE, DRANDRE.com.
Okay. Well, Andre, this has been a wonderful conversation. One of the big takeaways, I always try to have a big takeaway with my interviews. And for me was this, that you can switch your logical and your creative side. So this is great to know that this is something, so the audience that are hearing this, don't think that you are this way and that's it. No, you can change, but it's in you. It has to be in you that you decide to make the change. So, André, thank you for being here as a guest. It's been a wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much, Jose. It's been a lot of fun. I've really, really enjoyed it.
If you're a leader, you need to hear this. Great leadership isn't about having followers. It's about making more leaders. The real measure of leadership isn't about power or position. It's about impact and influence. The best leaders uplift, mentor, and empower others to reach their full potential. Leadership isn't about control. It's about creating a culture where people feel valued, inspired, and ready to grow. Remember this. If you treat your employees like they make a difference, they will. Join us in transforming leadership into a movement. Watch this video and see the incredible difference it makes when leadership is about building leaders, not followers. What's the best leadership advice you've ever received? Drop it in the comments.
Welcome to Building Resilience. I'm Jose Pereira, your host. This is the place where true leaders are forged, where stories of adversity turn into lessons of strength, and where faith, courage, and resilience come alive. Each week we bring you voices that inspire, challenge, and equip you to lead with an unbreakable spirit. This is more than a podcast. It's a movement. And it begins